Hello and welcome to the History Crew channel. In this video, we will explore the topic, Rise of Afrikaner Nationalism. The history of the Afrikaners technically began with the first European settlement by the Dutch, which would eventually become known as Cape Town. The Cape's early Dutch-speaking settlers gradually evolved a distinct variant of that language known as Afrikaans, and they themselves became known as Afrikaners, or Boers. By definition, an Afrikaner is a white person who is born in southern Africa. Simply put, the Afrikaners whose ancestors came from Europe do not see themselves as European, but rather as white Africans. By various strategies, they took over more land in the area and this would become known as the Cape Colony. The Cape Colony was under Dutch control, until approximately in 1820, when the British sent their own settlers and eventually took over the Cape Colony, which then belonged to Britain. These Afrikaners did not want to be under British control. In the 1830s, they took the collective decision to leave the Cape Colony and move into the interior of southern Africa and establish their own lands. This would become known as the Great Trek. They would then be free from British control. Over time and through various strategies such as war and diplomacy, the Afrikaners acquired new lands and created their own independent republics called Orange Free State and the South African Republic, also known as Transvaal. White Afrikaners living in the Boer republics of the Transvaal and Orange Free State developed a strong sense of Afrikaner national loyalty and resisted British control and influence. They also believed that Afrikaners had a special history as a chosen people, chosen by God. During the Great Trek of the 1830s, at this point in history, the Afrikaners were not really united. At first the British supported this, but when gold was discovered in Transvaal, their own desire for the land grew. It was then inevitable that there would be conflict between the British and Afrikaners. This would become known as the South African War. The South African War forced the Afrikaners into unity. Afrikaners took up arms together, in the war against the British. The Afrikaners were defeated in this war and were very upset by this, especially of how Afrikaner women and children were treated in the British concentration camps. Over 27,987 Afrikaner civilians died in these camps, 22,000 of whom were children under the age of 16. The Afrikaner nationalist movement built unity around this common heritage of oppression at British hands. Britain was then keen to compromise with the Afrikaners after the war, and one of the ways they did this was to create the Union as a self-governing country, although it was part of the British Empire. In the newly created Union, the Afrikaners wanted a greater say in what they saw as their country. They formed the National Party in 1914 to promote white Afrikaner interests and was led by J.B.M. Hertzog, a former Boer general and Afrikaner politician. In 1924, the National Party won the elections and Hertzog became Prime Minister. The National Party government began to immediately take steps to protect the Afrikaners. Afrikaans was recognized as an official language, and in 1928, a South African flag was adopted, which included the flags of the former Boer republics. The government also introduced policies to protect white workers, and ensure that whites were given the better paying and skilled jobs. Thousands of black workers lost their jobs and were replaced by white workers in departments such as the railways. During the Depression in the 1930s, the government made special efforts to help poor Afrikaners, who were referred to as poor whites. The Afrikaner government stressed their shared Afrikaner identity. Unskilled white workers were also given opportunities to increase their skill level by doing extra courses. Once they had passed the examinations, their improved qualifications enabled them to improve their standard of living. Black workers were not given such opportunities. In the 1930s, Afrikaner identity and Afrikaner nationalism grew stronger. Afrikaners were united by their own special history, language and culture. They placed a great emphasis on history as a means of creating an Afrikaner identity. Afrikaner nationalists established several organizations to promote these aims. The Broederbond, founded in 1918, was the driving force behind the growth of Afrikaner nationalism. It was a secret organization which wanted to end the English domination of the economy and to get an Afrikaner nationalist government into power, which would cut ties with Britain and make South Africa a republic. The Federation of Afrikaans Cultural Organizations was established by the Broederbond to support Afrikaner cultural activities. It made sure that Afrikaner cultural activities promoted nationalism. One of the organizations under its control was the Afrikaans Language and Cultural Organization. Afrikaner cultural organizations such as the Voortrekkers and the Noodhulpleger were established to promote and support the Afrikaner way of life. Afrikaners also preferred to use their own organizations. The rest of the country was also affected when an Afrikaans anthem, Die Stem, became the national anthem. What you must understand from this, is that the Afrikaners are taking measures to protect their identity and way of life. In 1938, the Broederbond organized a centenary trek, to commemorate the Great Trek of 100 years before. Afrikaners from around the country joined processions of Oxwagons journeying to Pretoria, where thousands gathered to witness the founding of the Voortrekker Monument, which was used to commemorate the Voortrekkers who left the Cape Colony. It is a building, which serves as a museum and glorifies Afrikaner history and achievements. At the time, the celebrations inspired such strong Afrikaner nationalism that some people even wore their traditional dress to work. Excited crowds dressed in Voortrekker dress welcomed the procession as it approached towns and cities. Streets were then renamed after Voortrekker heroes. This event was a great success for Afrikaner nationalism because it created unity between the Afrikaners and helped develop a strong desire for nationalism. From this pride, the Oxwagon Guard was formed at the event, and was supposed to be another cultural organization, but it became extremely political and extremist later on. All of these organizations and commemorations promoted the idea that white Afrikaners were a unique and special folk or people, with their own language, religion and history that needed to be promoted and defended. The National Party and the Afrikaner cultural and economic organizations deliberately promoted the idea of white Afrikaner unity. This was stressed especially through the Afrikaans language, the Dutch Reformed Church and political loyalty to the National Party. This idea of white Afrikaner unity and difference from other South Africans was evident in, firstly, in education, white Afrikaners were deliberately taught that being white made them superior. The history which was taught was biased and glorified Afrikaner achievements only. This became known as Christian national education. Afrikaner newspapers and publications by the nationalist press also promoted these ideas among the folk. Secondly, in the labor sector, white Afrikaner workers were encouraged to join Afrikaner trade unions such as the Spoorbond for railway workers in order to protect white workers. Thirdly, white Afrikaners were discouraged from belonging to foreign or English-dominated churches, such as the Anglican, Methodist or Catholic churches. Instead, loyal Afrikaners were expected to belong to the Dutch Reformed Church, which supported the National Party. Fourthly, in the economic sector, separate Afrikaner financial institutions were established, such as Volkskas Bank and Sanlam Building Society. The aim was to assist Afrikaners financially in a capitalist economy that was dominated by English-speaking white people. Do not forget that even though the Afrikaners are regarded as whites, they did not want any ties to the English-speaking whites, especially after the South African War. An Active Rescue Fund was formed to support new Afrikaner businesses with financial support. These ideas of affirmative economic action and a sense of racial supremacy formed the background to the policy of apartheid. After World War II, more white Afrikaner voters joined the Purified National Party that had been established in the 1930s to promote a purer form of Afrikaner nationalism. This party was voted into power in the 1948 election. The leader of this party and the new government was D.F. Malan. He said, "In the past we felt like strangers in our own country, but today South Africa belongs to us once more. For the first time since Union, South Africa is our own. May God grant that it always remains our own." Afrikaner nationalism had now been achieved, and now there was a government in power dedicated to breaking ties with Britain, advancing the economic and political power of white Afrikaners through affirmative action, and introducing a strict system of segregation, designed to preserve and extend white domination. Many of Malan's government were members of the Broederbond and even supporters of Hitler's Nazi Party ideology. So it would come as no surprise, when the apartheid government enforced laws similar to the Nazi laws from 1948 onwards. And thus Afrikaner nationalism had been achieved. Many historians will argue that it is the right for all people to identify themselves as a part of a nation. However, Afrikaner nationalism was developed and achieved by repressing the right of other racial groups in South Africa and the creation of apartheid in South Africa. Thank you for watching this video, and please remember to subscribe to the History Crew channel.